Welcome to History 111, Lecture 16, The Revolution of 1800. From the moment of Jefferson's election, he conducts himself very differently than the past two U.S. presidents. First of all, he's going to avoid what he sees as being overly sober or formal or ceremonial things that Washington and Adams had done, so he's going to do things like he's going to walk to the inauguration. He's going to not dress up as fancily as maybe Adams had, and some people see him as a president for the common man, and other people see him as a president for the great unwashed and unruly masses. Now, Jefferson's political philosophy was that the government which governs least governs best. He believed that the federal government should conduct foreign policy and oversee relations between states, and that's it. He believed that the individual states have, as he put it, the principal care of our persons, our property, and our reputation. That really, most day-to-day things for people were states' issues. There was a very limited role for federal government. While this is a time where there's a big belief and push towards limited government, there's one really important thing we do have to know occurs during Jefferson's presidency, a Supreme Court case called Marbury v. Madison, and it has to do with some actions taken by Madison as a Secretary of State. What's really important about it is it establishes a system of judicial review, and the case ultimately forces the Supreme Court to deal with two questions. In a conflict, who's going to win? Congress or the Constitution? And more important than that, who is supposed to decide who wins? And ultimately the answer the Supreme Court comes up with is, that's what the Supreme Court is for. They have the power to declare things unconstitutional and so on. Decide, is Congress right or is the Constitution right? That is powers that were ambiguous in the original Constitution, and the Supreme Court decides exactly how they ought to be exercised. Now, despite believing in strictly limited government, Jefferson does advocate for a lot of things he sees as being in the interest of the United States, first and foremost being education. Jefferson called for a crusade against ignorance, and Republicans that supported him also argue for a nationwide system of schools, and they argue that that system should be free but for boys only. Few states act, however, and no state has a comprehensive education system by 1815. The schools that exist tend to be private and secular. They were also expensive, which limited education to the rich. Now, while there were some public schools, education was available there was generally inferior. Now, when it came to the view of education for women, Republican motherhood becomes the dominant idea then. Now, women are expected to raise children at this time, and they are expected to raise them to be enlightened Americans. So this idea leads Massachusetts and then some other states to require schools to serve girls as well, and the female literacy rate at that point was around 50%. Now, the reason they're doing this is based on a simple assumption. The assumption is that education for girls was useful as a tool to make them better wives and mothers. So that meant that if a woman could read, she could teach her children to read and help with their education. But they saw no further value beyond that, so as a result, universities, for example, are going to very rarely admit women during this time period. With regards to the non-white population, there's a very different approach for Native Americans and African Americans. When it comes to Native Americans, the prevailing view was that if they were educated, they would choose to live like white Americans, and that's going to have big consequences for the frontier regions. Now, on the other hand, we have to remember for African Americans, the majority of those people were enslaved at this time, and there's little desire to educate them, and some people believe that education for slaves would ultimately only breed unrest and rebellion. An issue Republicans are going to take up is higher education, and a lot of Republicans want to see an expansion of universities within the states. Now, at the beginning of this period, there's only 9 universities which are going to expand rapidly after that, and a lot of Republicans are going to really take efforts to see this expand. Jefferson, for example, is going to found the University of Virginia. His Treasury Secretary, Albert Gallatin, is going to found NYU. Now, the curriculum of all these universities tends to be classics, law, and theology, and they're providing a very general education that people thought was going to be good for the upper and middle classes at this time. Now, even though there's an expansion, access is still limited, as really the rich people who are most able to benefit from this expansion of higher education. Now, one of the consequences of the expansion of education is midwives increasingly become seen as unscientific and people stop wanting their services. Now, midwives had always been an occupation in which women could go into, learn a little bit about medicine and general folk remedies and cures, and really kind of help people who don't have access to a lot of medicine. But with the decline of people wanting their services, less women enter the occupation, and women in general are pushed out of the medical field. As a consequence, it also cuts off access to medicine for the poor who cannot afford doctors, and doctors are seen as scientific, and that's what everyone wants. And a good example of a doctor at that time is Benjamin Rush. He was a pretty elite figure. He was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, and he advocated what he called scientific techniques like bleeding and purging. A lot of his treatments involved mercury and laxatives, and his patients often died. But he was seen as being scientific, whereas midwives were seen as being somehow medieval or antiquated, and there's a big shift in terms of what people want. During this same time as well, there's a lot of cultural nationalism coming along, and people are looking to sponsor American art, American literature, and they want to use it as a symbol of independence. In other words, now they have political recognition, they want intellectual recognition. And a good example at this point is Noah Webster, and he's going to publish a spelling book that simplifies and standardizes American spelling, and it becomes the most popular book in the United States after the Bible. And eventually that spelling book emerges into Webster's dictionary. And this book is the origin of a number of key differences between American and European English, like how we spell color, defense, and center, and so on. Washington Irving is another important figure. He becomes something of an author-in-chief of the New Republic. He starts publishing in 1802. He tells distinctly American stories that tend to stress American ideals and Republican ideals. He's going to also write histories that are as much fiction as not, and he was never afraid to make something up if it made his story fit his value-based narrative. Two good examples are Washington the Cherry Tree, the whole I can't tell a lie scenario, and also Columbus and the Flat World. What we should know is that he has a huge and profound impact on American literature. This time period is one of significant change also for the nation's spiritual life. The revolution of the intervening years had really detached church from government, and church attendance in the 1790s was down around 10% according to some estimates. And a lot of Americans were deists, and deism is a French idea that states that God created the universe, but then had no further involvement after that. So that while there was a creator, there really is no divine intervention in day-to-day affairs. That's the deist theory. Now, a lot of deists regard formal religion as a set of odd superstitions and make rational, if not sarcastic, arguments against formal church-going religion. Now, at this time period, there's another movement that runs contrary to this, and it's the Second Great Awakening. There's a big pushback against that religious skepticism in the 1790s. Cane Ridge is a major event. It's the first highly organized attempt at a mass religious gathering, and 25,000 people showed up. Now, the message here in this particular movement is not uniform, but generally concentrated on having God as part of a daily life. The Second Great Awakening tends to be female-dominated. That has to do with large numbers of men seeking to adventure out in the new territories. Women had fewer prospects, but churches provided a much-needed social structure and a sense of community when all of these men were away exploring the new territories opened up by the Northwest Ordinance. And female domination of the church caught on even in demographically balanced areas because it spread from those demographically unbalanced places where there are few men into kind of a national movement all up and down the East Coast. The Second Great Awakening often included a message of equality before God. It included this idea that everyone could be saved and so on. Now, African American preachers, who were sometimes slaves themselves, are going to translate this call for equality before God into a call for equality in day-to-day life. Now, many Native Americans are also going to get in on this religious fervor as well. And after years of military defeat, the loss of lands and so on, a lot of the peoples that bore the United States were in a state of crisis and were open to radical cultural shift. But support for this religious movement was far from universal. And in particular, a lot of them had issues where women resisted changes in their society and branded witches, and a lot of social and disorder and chaos came out of this. This is also a time of significant technological and economic change. There's a lot of immigration happening, and in particular, these new immigrants are often bringing the technologies of the Industrial Revolution with them. The first factory in the United States is founded by an immigrant. There's, in general, within the United States, an interest in technology and inventors into mechanical engineering. And there's some key technologies that emerge. There had been a decline in tobacco production within the South that had been reducing the demand for slave labor. Now, enter into this is a couple of new technologies that's going to really change that situation. Eli Whitney invents the cotton gin, which is a significant labor-saving device. There was existing high demand for cotton, and it required a lot of labor, but processing the cotton was cost prohibitive prior to the cotton gin. There were only certain types of cotton you can grow, and most of the South was not suitable for growing them. But once this cotton gin comes in, you can suddenly grow cotton more places, and all of a sudden, slavery, which is on the decline, turns around and really becomes something the South relies on again because all of a sudden they have this new need for labor, and that's going to really entrench that institution even further within that region. Now, one of the consequences of the cotton boom within the South is going to be that cotton supply is going to go up, and then with factory technology being introduced in the North, there's going to be a boom in northern textile manufacturing. And American inventors are going to start thinking up all kinds of other things like interchangeable parts, which is going to simplify complex production. One of the important things is this is going to allow Americans to mass produce guns cheaply and quickly, and that gives them a little bit of an edge in the quasi war with France. Industrial technologies are also going to be applied first from the cotton and textile industry to all kinds of other areas, leading to a great industrialization of the North, while at the same time period, the South becomes really all about cotton and cotton production. The expansion of the American economy also spurs on a growth of American shipping, and a lot of trade policies favor American ships to help stimulate the internal economy. In addition, neutrality in European wars is going to allow American shipping access to key markets. You should know that the American merchant marine fleet is the second largest merchant marine in the world this time by raw numbers and the first per capita. In other words, the United States had proportionally more ships than everybody else. They were just not as big of a nation as, say, Britain, which had more ships in raw numbers. Now, being neutral, though, is going to bring the United States into conflict with some North African states, and because of the shipping and so on, and the United States is going to invade Tripoli, which is part of modern-day Libya. And that has to do with raids on American shipping by pirates operating from that area. In addition, we're also going to be improving the river and canal transport system in the United States, and a systematic canal transport system is imported from England, and the idea is simply to connect the rivers, and it becomes possible to navigate by river from New York City to New Orleans as a result of all this. Now, better ships are also going to help river trade, and a man named Fulton is going to invent a steamboat which makes sailing against powerful currents feasible and open up new areas for navigation. And that's particularly important because on the Mississippi River, it was very easy to go down the Mississippi River, but not so easy to go up until the steam engine really changes that and provides the power you need to move against strong currents. The road transport system is also further developed by the United States at this point. Most roads in the United States were dirt paths and not worth using in the rain, and a system of hard surface turnpikes starts to emerge. And the better road surface is going to make transport quicker, more efficient, reliable, and means you could use it during bad weather. These are largely built by private investors and run for profit, and linked only densely populated areas. Now, a lot of these operated based on toll gates and so on. And this whole idea is again imported by England and brought over by immigrants who are seeing the kind of developments of industrialization in England and bringing them to the new United States. So what's the big idea here? Well, first and foremost, Jefferson was all about limited government. Now, he did do things like encourage education in a not exactly systematic way, which had its mixed successes and failures, and also is a period of strong economic growth and a real change in sort of technology and how people are going to be applying it to their daily lives. See you in the next lecture.